The Lord led me to the book of Ruth. Whenever I read the book of Ruth, I always cry. The first time I read the book of Ruth, it was given to me by someone who goes to, just the same way the book of Joseph was given to me by someone from Jehovah's Witness, is exactly how the book of Ruth was given to me. I was given a book which had, the Watchtower Church, they used to write books. They have colorful books with illustrations. So for me, at one point after I prayed, they gave me the book of Joseph, and it was like connected to my calling and destiny. It really had an impact in my life because the Lord spoke to me, and I had deep revelations that transformed the course of my life and led me to overcoming and breaking generational cases and limitations, because in our family I was the one who broke them. There were a lot of limitations that I'm the one who became the first, and after I broke them, then my siblings, even those older than me, were able to now do things that they couldn't do. But the process of breaking these things is not easy. That's why the Bible says, because the enemy, when he puts these limitations and these generational cases, he doesn't wait for you to fight him and resist and destroy them. Because even when you're the one trying to destroy these limitations and cases you're trying to break through, the enemy will fight hard, because he knows once you break through, others will also be able. So he will lose a lot. So he will fight tooth and nail to make sure that you don't have a breakthrough. So it needs someone who is mentally, spiritually, and even emotionally strong, because there are a lot of things that will happen. And even some people who are in bondage will come against you. Your relatives will come against you. Many people, even friends, neighbors, you'll be in a situation whereby Satan will raise people to fight and destroy you and try to weaken you. He can even use illnesses. I was so sick, the devil tried even to kill me many times, and it was only by the grace of God that I didn't die. But there were many times that he tried. He even tried, when they fail, they even try to initiate you into witchcraft. That fails. They give you a disease which will baffle doctors. And, it gets to a point whereby some bow and start to and get initiated only because they are tired of fighting, or they compromise because they realize that I will die. Fear of death will lead them to these things. So I want to talk about the book of Ruth, because when I read the book of Ruth, I remember the first time I read it when I was I think I was 9 years old. I cried when I read that book. And even, every time I read that book, I always cry. I don't know. It's always like something, it really, I find it very, I don't know, it's very personal for me, the battle, the things that Ruth went through. And I could relate because, when I was 9 years old, my mother had lost my father. And I was the only one who felt my mother's pain. I used to, I got to a point whereby, as a child, I started to ask my mother to help her, look after us, because I knew my future was so bright. But my mother, even though she was, she was doing a lot of things because my father passed on. And then it was not sudden, but my mother did not have a career. She was just a housewife when my father passed on. And I saw the way she mourned my father on the funeral. It was that kind of mourning where a person didn't know where to start from. She was so lost. The pain, even the words of comfort did not even help her. She was like so lost. And I see that today when I'm on Twitter, I see a lot of women losing their husbands. Maybe for most of them, the husbands are dying in their sleep. For my father, it was not like that. He died a painful death. So for me, when I look at the book of Ruth, for me, I also have like my memory is very sharp. I can recall past memories in I don't know, in detail. My husband always says he always tells me that the way I remember things in detail, it's very he finds it very interesting. So I want to start, the book of Ruth. I want to first read the first chapter. Because the book of Ruth, for me, it's very personal because it talks about everyday struggles that people go through and how a person can be in a situation where they sort of like lose everything, like Naomi did, and then God redeems them. So for me, when I read about Ruth, I want to start with the first chapter, first Ruth 1, verse 1. Okay. It was, for me, it always leads me to tears. I don't want to lie. Every time I read the book of Ruth, there are other books in the Bible that have the same impact on me. But hey, the book of Ruth is something else. So the book of Ruth, the setting, it was just like, I don't know the timing and the things about the book of Ruth. I mean the time, but it comes right after the book of Judges. And after the book of Judges, we come from, it was a time where, if you read the book of Judges and the Exodus and the book of Joshua, you notice that after the children of Israel left Egypt, they were always going in and they were always worshipping idols. They were turning against God, and God would turn against them and would deliver them into the hands of the enemy, and the enemy would prevail over them for some time. So we see the times where God raised judges. As long as that judge is alive, there will be like peace and healing and deliverance. But when the judge who is raised by God dies, passes on, then they turn away again from God. And it was like this, sort of like a very toxic relationship where they would be unfaithful. The people were unfaithful to God. They were serving other gods. And because of that, they were going through a lot of problems. So according to the information I got, actually, it takes place around 1300 to 1000 before Christ. So the book talks about okay, let's read the first chapter. I want to read it verse by verse because I really want to savor this book. It's very personal to me. I really like this book because it's one of those books. I like several books in the Bible, but this one and other books, there's some books that make me cry when I read them. Some scriptures, because of the revelation that happened, because of the things that were happening in my life, and because of how God used those scriptures to speak to me and to edify me in a situation, I always whenever I read certain books, I'm in tears. Like this one is one of those books. So Ruth 1, chapter 1. Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. You notice like this happened also to Abraham, this happened to others before him. When there was a famine, they always go to other people's land and they got food. It happened to Abraham, it also happened to Jacob. It also, it's something that was so common. Because Abraham, there was a time when there was a famine, he went to Egypt and lived there because of the famine was severe. That's according to Genesis 12 verse 10. So it's something that used to happen whenever there is a famine in the land. You notice like it happened also in the time of Isaac. Now there was another famine in the land to the one that it will get to Abraham's time. And Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines at Gerar. So it used to happen a lot. These things where there'll be a famine. And even Jacob, there was a famine in the time of Jacob where Joseph was already living in Egypt. And, so okay, let's go on. This is the first verse. There was a famine, yes. And, okay, the next verse. And the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi. And the name of his two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, the Ephrathites of the Bethlehem, Judah. And they came into the country of Moab and continued there. So, yeah, this is... Then the next verse. I wish I could do a deep Bible study on this, because I did the Bible study with my children of this, and of course I cried. Both of I cried when I was reading when we were reading this, and I decided to read it myself instead of asking one of them to read. But for them they're not surprised, because for me when I started to cry, my children started to comfort me, then say, "No, Mom, this is so personal for you because you were raised by a widow, and you find this you find this very, it's like your own life that you are reading in a way so that's why you are so touched." Yeah, so the next verse. And Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left and her two sons. So imagine you move to a land, there's a famine, and then you move to another land, running from the famine and running from death. And then when you go there, the first thing that happens, your husband dies. It's really, there's a powerful revelation here. Death, they left Bethlehem, Judah, and then they went to the land of idol worshippers. And in the place of idol worshippers, there is plenty, so they're trying to run away from death. And then, but the irony is that they were faced with death when they got there, because the very thing that people run away from. So if you are in the land of idols, you lose your covering of God. There are certain things that can happen when you go and live in a polluted environments. Even though in material things, those places may be good to be in, but spiritual blessings are not there. You lose covering. So you need, when you're going to such places, you need actually to make sure your prayer life goes up, because you are going in a territory of territorial spirits and powers that are given legal rights over the community, over the nation. So for me, whenever I move to a different country, I struggle. I first have to deal with the principalities, and they start attacking me even before I move there. Sometimes, it even happens before I even know. I noticed something interesting. There was a time when we were living in one country where my mother-in-law came, and when she visited, they did something to our house. They took the soil there to make an altar, to make sure that every time we were going to meet misfortunes because they like dedicated the soil. I don't know whether they taken my footprint or my husband's footprint or just it. I don't know how this soil was, but it was connected to us, and they're also taken some clothes for one of our children then. And for me, I did not even know what's going on. My husband did not even know what's going on when that happened. And that altar was really powerful because we were having accidents whenever we visited that country. But unknown to them, what happened after my mother-in-law visited, the next thing that God did, he moved us from that country. But just before we moved from that country, my mother-in-law's sister knew that we were going to leave. And then she even started talking about it, and the children were talking about it, that your son and his wife are planning to run away from you. They want to leave that country for another country. And at the time, we were even shocked with my husband because we didn't even have any plans. At the time, the thought of even leaving that country and the possibility of even getting jobs in another country, we're not even aware of that possibility. But witches, they know. So they already did whatever they did, and us, we didn't know anything. But God, who fights for us, was already fighting and revealed to them that whatever they had planned was not going to come to pass. So we left that country by God's grace. And then after we left that country, for us, it only made sense what they said. Only because for us, when an opportunity arose and God put it on my heart and my husband's heart to leave. But at the time, we did not even remember what my mother-in-law had said. We did not even remember what was spoken. So, it's so interesting the way God can move you to protect you. But not every move, because remember, we are not wrestling against flesh and blood. So there's another element. Whenever we are moving, we also need to ramp up our prayers so that we can, if you are praying, you need to change gears so that you go deeper, because you are now challenging territories, and these are things that you need to do on your own. And God will fight for you, but you need to grow. You need to do things. Consecrate yourself. Live a life whereby when you move, after the move, you are safe. So let's read the next verse. The next verse is like Ruth 1. It's now talking about, after Elimelech passed on, and Naomi's husband Elimelech died, and she was left with her 2 sons. That verse 3. Verse 4. And they took for themselves Moabite women as wives, and the name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. And they lived there about 10 years. This is something interesting. When the children of Israel left the promised land, they were told not to marry from the land where they were going. They were warned about this. You must not marry. You must not pollute yourself. So God had already warned them. I think there are many scriptures that talk about that warning. One of the scriptures that I remember so well that talks about this is it's like I think it's Malachi 2. So as I was watching this, I was doing a Bible study where I was asking I was asking questions online to trying to get answers and questions from this thing, because for me, I wanted to understand something. So one of the things I asked online was, why were these sons married to wives who are from nations that worship the idol? The Moabs, they're worshiping the idol. Because, these sons, they also married from this place. the sons. And the father, after they married from this place, they also died prematurely, according to the next verse. Verse 5. They also died. Now Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and without her husband. So, for me, this verse about the death of the husband, for me, I feel like, no, that was not natural. Then but then when I hear also about the death of the sons again, but the sons after they married the Moabites, for me, the question that I was asking myself was this God's plan? Luckily for me, I remembered scriptures that talked about this. So I was trying to question why these sons who were advised not to marry, because that was one of the conditions. You must not marry when you enter the land that the Lord is going to give you. It's in Deuteronomy where the Lord is talking about curses and blessings, Deuteronomy was talking about these things, that when you enter, what you can do and what you can do when you enter this land, they were given rules to follow. So they are told that when they enter that land, you are not going to marry from there. Otherwise, you become cursed. Okay, let me just read Deuteronomy 26. Let me go there. Deuteronomy 26. Because they were supposed to not defile themselves by marrying people who worship idols. So they were told, when you get these places, when you go into this promised land that I will give you, you are not supposed to defile yourself by marrying women, marrying from those who are in those nations, because they worship idols. You shall not defile yourself with them. But so when I see this, where this person married from there, these 2 sons, because I noticed something even in the book of when in Genesis, when Isaac was about to marry, they had to go and look for a wife among his people, where they got Rebecca. When Jacob was supposed to marry, that was the custom that they would go back to their own people and marry from there. But now you see something, that now they are marrying the children, wives of, from these families that had defiled. The kings were given this, even it was a command that they shall not marry from the land where they are going to be. Don't marry even when I take you to that land. Don't marry there. Don't be polluted by those women. This was a rule that was given to the Jewish people. But somehow, when these ones went, they forgot about that. So I asked myself, why are these people defying God's law? And after they defy God's law about marriage, in the end, they die prematurely after they defied that. So that could be, so I was asking, there's this thing where I was asking questions. I asked something like, why does you can do some Bible studies online, and there are many resources you can look for online. And the Bible doesn't say anything about the background of Elimelech, who he was. I don't know if it's mentioned, or his sons, or the reason why they married them from Moab, the nation that worshipped idols. They don't say that. But we know, even if you go to the book of Malachi, in Malachi 2, you read that you read that they were told not to marry. The Lord is clear about marrying daughters of strange god. For example, in Malachi 2 verse 11, he even calls it an abomination for a Jewish to marry someone who worships another god. God points out that the covenant of marriage must not be profaned to ensure that the seeds of such marriages are spiritually pure and unpolluted. The children from those marriages, they are not to be polluted. So there are three factors why, one, they would have married, though intermarried. Maybe because they were geographically, they were trying to fit in the place where they were, like diplomatic or economic alliances, where you move to a land and you want to belong there and you can marry there to fit in. That's one of the things. And the other reason why they did it, they were not raised right. Their lack of faith, it could be a result of lack of faith and disobedience, because they could have done like what Abraham did to find a wife for Isaac, and what Jacob did going to get from his people. But they were disobedient and they married daughters of strange gods. So it may suggest that they got influenced by the culture of the place where they went to, and they drifted away from their Jewish faith. It is actually seen as a sign of compromise on their faith, because the Jewish are very particular about this. You notice, like, even the people that are called Lemba people, Varemba in Zimbabwe, they don't, if you marry from outside, they even reject you because they are interested in maintaining their DNA. They don't believe in marrying outside. They can even reject you. And you see that even with the Jewish, those people who are the true Jewish, they follow those things. But there's something interesting here. The Bible does not explain the reason for the premature death of Elimelech or the two sons. But their death, also the two sons, may be a result of their consequence. Or, or maybe, there's certain things that are a bit complex. It may appear like a generational case because the premature death followed the father, and it's now happening to the sons that are dying at the same time. So for me, I believe that the reason, God respects free will. And when you drift away from God, when they drifted away from God, they married outsiders. But, and it led to a generational curse. But however, I look at it also, God allows us free will, to exercise our free will. But he also influenced the connection to Ruth. Because of Ruth's heart, even though she was a non-Jewish, God had already found a way to redeem this family through Ruth. So one may say God's sovereign plan was the reason why the events turned out the way they did, why they ended up, their unfaithfulness led to them marrying those women who are Moabites, and God still used them. Like, for example, one of the things that I like about this is like why we can't know for certain. It's possible that God can allow these marriages to occur as part of his larger plan. The book of Ruth ultimately tells a story of redemption. Ruth, a Moabite woman who becomes an integral part of the family lineage of King David and Jesus. Perhaps these marriages were part of God's plan to bring Ruth into the family and fulfill his purpose. But what I like about God God does not, when God wants his plan and his will to be done, he chooses a person. And sometimes this person may not be who you expect to be chosen. Like Ruth was an unbeliever. But because of her character, she was selfless. She was a person who, when she married these people, into this family, and abandoned her family idols, she never looked back. So, one thing I liked about this when I was doing the Bible study with someone, they were saying the insights that I was, they were commenting about these insights that I just talked about. So the Bible warns us against marrying outside of the faith. And Malachi 2:11 is a clear example of this. The idea of a generational curse is also a theme in the Bible. And it's possible that premature death of Mahlon and Chilion were a result of this. Ruth's story is a beautiful example of how God can work through our choices and circumstances to bring about his plans. While Elimelech's family may have drifted from their faith, Ruth's loyalty, devotion to Naomi and the God of Israel ultimately led to the redemption of the family line. God respects free will, and he can and is foreknowing, and he can also use our choices to bring about his purpose. Ruth's decision to stay with Naomi and follow the God of Israel was a turning point in the story, and it was a powerful example how our faithfulness can impact future generations. Remember, I was always talking about Ezekiel 22:30. It's a great reference point here, as it highlights the importance of having someone stand in the gap and intercede on behalf of others. Ruth's actions can be seen as a form of intercession, as she stood in the gap for Naomi and the family line, and their faithfulness ultimately led to the breaking of a curse. So, when God wants to do something, he looks for a person who is moved and is willing to stand in the gap when the walls are broken. And that person them standing and enjoying everything is actually very important. Because the process of breaking a generational curse, it works through a lot. It takes the emotions. It takes even this. It tests the faith of the person standing in the gap. It tests even their physical strength and their willpower and their faith. So it's something that can only be done when you are a person who is focused on God. So one of the things that I also noticed from this, they both died. And then we go to verse, the children died. Then now the interesting bit, then she arose with her daughters-in-law, that she might return from the country of Moab. For she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited his people and giving them bread. Wherefore she went forth out of a place where she was, and her two daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return unto the land of Judah. So, one of the interesting things that for me, that are really personal, you move from your country to run away from a famine, and then whilst away, you lose your husband and you lose your sons, or you have two daughters-in-laws. And like every culture, once a person dies, like a daughter-in-law is no longer bound by that marriage and they are free to remarry. So, it's when you look at the situation where this woman was even thinking of going back, you can imagine how it feels. You lose all family that you had in a foreign land and you have to go back to your own people. You have nothing there. You are going to be there with nothing and only very distant relatives. And you don't have money, you don't have anything for yourself. You are going to rely mostly on charity. So, I can imagine what was going through Naomi's mind. Because for her, she had already thought that these people are with me only because, they're still mourning. After they are done mourning, their life, they're still young. They can move on. And they can live a happy life. So, and Naomi's experience was really, it's marked up by, I'm reading something, by great loss and immense loss and vulnerability. Being a widow in a foreign country, far from her family and community, was already a challenging situation. But then to lose both her sons, who were her only remaining family, was a devastating blow. Naomi was also advanced in age, which means she had little prospect of having more children to carry on the family line. This added to a sense of loss and hopelessness. And in ancient cultures, family and children were seen as blessing and means of ensuring one's legacy. And even now, that's true. Naomi's situation was a stark contrast to this cultural ideal. Her decision to return to Bethlehem, her hometown, was likely a difficult one, especially since she had no family or support system to turn to. She would have to rely on the kindness of her community and charity of her relatives, which was no guarantee. Naomi's story highlights the struggles and vulnerabilities that women in particular faced in patriarchy systems, societies experience. Her experience serves as a backdrop to the beautiful story of Ruth's loyalty and redemption. So if you look at it for her, you can imagine if you had to put yourself in the shoes of the daughters-in-law. They were worshipping idols, and then they decide to marry from this family that worships as a different God, a living God. And then they are faced with these misfortunes at a young age. And in patriarchal systems where people are Christians, when you suffer such losses and people's understanding, when you suffer a loss of a husband and all children in a short time, you can be blamed for such losses. People can say this woman is cursed. And you can even be stigmatized as a woman. You will actually be isolated because of also superstition, and also the belief, the understanding of generational cases where people are always looking for someone to blame. So people don't exactly offer support and empathy to people like Naomi. Rather, they blame them and shame them. And they don't understand that these people need love. And I remember when I was young, when, for us, at the time when my mother was widowed, life was tough. Most people were scared of widows because they were scared that they would lose their husbands to them. I remember my mother, when we were looking for a house to rent, for a place to rent, like some rooms to rent, my mother was turned away because, like, one of the people were concerned that if she doesn't have a husband, now have a husband, what will happen when my husband is collecting rent? It was really difficult for my mother. Until my mother's cousin's husband is the one who had to vouch for my mother for her to get a house to rent. So it was so difficult. And even then, after she got that house, the person was difficult. We're like renting 2 rooms and things were piling on top of each other. So my mother decided to send us to the village for the holidays while she settled, because it was quite a hard move. But once we came back for the holidays, we couldn't stay there. The place was bad. The couple who owned the house, the woman was really nasty. We were feeling, I remember only when we got back, we only slept one night at that house, or less than a week. And then my older brother refused to sleep there because God came through for us. My mother found my mother was able to find a house, and the house was like a, they call it just a shell. There's this Kenyan neighbor I once had. This is very rare, where a person, a mother-in-law, you lose your husband and they are blessing you and wishing you well. Most times they are doing rituals to make sure this daughter-in-law will never get married. They are doing rituals to bewitch the daughter-in-law. There are many cases like that. Or they are fighting with the daughter-in-law for the things that they left. And it's like this animosity, especially especially in African culture, in the French. They do that a lot. I think the French, I always joke that they are like the Africans, the way they behave, the French. But then this mother-in-law is such a beautiful experience, where the mother-in-law is wishing the daughters-in-law the best and wishing them that they can be happy and be with their new husbands. And they said unto her, verse 10, surely we will return with thee unto thy people. And Naomi said, turn again, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Are there yet more sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn again, my daughters, go your way, for I'm too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, if I should have a husband also tonight, and should also be a sons, will you tarry for them till they were grown? Will you stay for them from having husbands? Nay, no, my daughters, for it grieves me much for your sake, that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me. She's reminding me of Job. And they lifted up their voice and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law. But Ruth clave unto her, and she said, behold, thy sister-in-law is gone back unto her people and unto her gods. Return thou after thy sister-in-law. And Ruth said, entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For where you will go, I will go, and where will you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. So you see, this one, Ruth refused to leave. She clung. She said, no, I'm not going anywhere. Wherever you are going, I will be there. I will not abandon you. And now, so you see, Ruth was really persistent. She decided, no, I'm not going to leave this woman. Wherever she will go, I'll go. Because for me, when I left my God, I left those idols. And I got into this marriage. It was for life. There are very few women who can do what Ruth did. Most women, or even men, when they marry, okay, this is applicable to women. When they marry their wives, when they marry into a family, and there is a death, some are not even going to mourn. They are rushing to move on to the next man. Some, even when they are children, they run after other men, which is such a disgrace. So verse 18, where you will die, this is Ruth speaking, where you die, I will die, for there I will be buried. The Lord do so to me and me also, if anything but death parts you and me. For me, this is quite moving. When she saw that she was steadfastly minded to go with her, then she left speaking unto her. So you see, this for me is something that is very interesting for me. And I'm trying to be strong because this Ruth book gets to me. And if I start to cry now, you will not hear anything. So yeah, I'm really, that's why I'm digressing a lot, to try and Ruth's decision to stay with Naomi and follow her God despite the hardships speaks to her remarkable resilience, loyalty, and faith in the God of Israel, the living God. Orpah's decision to return to her people and gods, on the other hand, may have been motivated by a desire to connect with her roots and comfort and find comfort in familiar surroundings. Both responses are understandable given the circumstance and highlight the different ways people cope with trauma, loss, and displacement. Their stories serve as a powerful reminder of the importance of empathy, compassion, and support for those navigating difficult circumstances, especially when they are far from home and familiar comfort. So for me, I don't really blame Orpah for leaving, because for her, she was also, it was her purpose to go. God allowed it. Whatever decision she chose, God allowed it. I'm not saying Ruth by staying she was better, but it was so even when a person suffers a death, they are no longer bound. If you're a woman, your husband dies, you mourned, you did everything necessary that you need to do, and especially when you have children, you keep them connected to their paternal grandparents and aunts and all where possible. I don't think it's a problem to remarry because the Bible allows it. So for me, when I'm talking about Ruth, I'm not saying that Orpah was wrong. So for me, I was moved by Ruth because her position, when she left the idols and when she got into this marriage, for her, it was like, this thing, I'm not looking back. When she left everything behind, Ruth, when she made a decision to marry this man, she had given up all, and including, and had truly devoted her life, not just to this man, but also to the mother-in-law and also to the God of Israel. So despite her own losses and heartbreaks, she was firm on her faith and never looked back. As evidence of her faith, she could have remarried and start over, but she was so touched by Naomi and decided to be there for her. Even if it meant that she would not have a husband at such a young age, she was willing to do it. She was so moved by Naomi's situation. She was selfless and chose to stand with a widow who had lost everything. Very few women can do that. Her selflessness, loyalty, and devotion to Naomi are truly inspiring. Her decision to remain with Naomi despite potential for a new life, family, demonstrates just the love for her mother-in-law and commitment to her faith. It shows compassion, empathy, and kindness, where she put Naomi's needs before her own. For me, I remember when I was young, when my father died, my grandmother was a witch, and she used to, she was a witch who used to worship God a lot. And she was she was an evil woman, and she still is alive. But my grandmother, she never accepted my mother, and she never accepted us. So when my father died, my mother could have just cut relations with the mother-in-law because she was even fighting to live with us. My father on his deathbed, he had to write a will to make sure my mother would stay with us. Because my grandmother's argument was that my mother is too young, she can leave the children with her and go and marry another man and whatever. So that's what she was pushing for. And she was even using witchcraft on my mother, stealing her underwears and taking them to witch doctors, to the point that the witch doctors even told my mother to not birth there and to avoid my mother in my grandmother's house. And there was a lot of, there was extreme witchcraft. But my mother, she made a decision which was really powerful. She was so hurt when she lost my father. But she decided that, okay, this woman, she doesn't like me and she doesn't like you. But her own son is dead. And because her own son is gone, I need to be there for her. So even though I may not be able to be visiting him because I'm scared for my life. Because my mother, whenever she visited and spent the night, she would be so sick. Even after eating, we would eat the same food, but she would be violently ill after eating the food. Because my grandmother was trying to get rid of her so that she can have us and use us for witchcraft. Because she couldn't initiate us because of my mother. My mother was prayerful. She was a powerful woman and she was spiritually gifted. And she transformed many lives, many marriages. So, but my mother sacrificed. She had to deal with additional warfare where she had to protect us. But she told us that she cannot deny our grandmother her grandchildren. She said, that's the least I can do. She no longer has a son. But you are my children and you are a great children. Through you, the memory of your son lives on. So I cannot be selfish. I know it will be dangerous. I will do whatever it takes. We would go to the village. We would even buy maize flour, like palenta. We would even go with those things. We would go with a lot of groceries. My grandmother was difficult. But my mother never gave up. My mother, up to the time she passed on, she would allow us to go for holidays. And whenever she noticed something bad was happening with one of us, she would hear, like there was a time when something was happening and my mother, I was like in Form 4. Something was happening in that place because we visited my grandmother and she just left us all alone. And where she left us, it's a place which had witchcraft. There are things in the house that are disturbing us at night, and the yard, you couldn't even be there. It was so heavy. So it was, my brothers would go out, my sister would go out, so it would just be me at the house. So in the end, I had to be standing close to the road because I was so scared. I was always alone. And I remember at that time I even had a boyfriend, not because I wanted to date. I told him, I'm talking to you because I'm scared. I can't be here. Can you please sit with me? And would sit like close to the road where people are singing. So it was that kind of, so when that happened to me, for me, it was a coping. For me, I've always connected well with boys because I have brothers. I was closer to my brothers more than my sisters. So I remember at the time, that time, something, this guy, when I was like, I had completed my O-level, Form 4. And then we were just friends. He was, I was talking to him as a friend. But then for him, his family took me like I'm his girlfriend. And even him, there was a time he even tried to force himself on me. And there was a time when his sister-in-law tried to set me up. So, when that happened, my mother was very spiritual. My mother sent just after it happened, and my mother sent a code for me to come home immediately. She just sent a message that I must travel that very day. I must come back. And I traveled at night. I went to get the bus at around 4 or 5 p.m. And then that bus, it was scary things that I witnessed that day. And that bus could not go all the way because it was supposed to go overnight. And I was just alone. And I was like, that was what? How old was I then? I think I was 16 or 17 after 17. Yeah, I just turned 17. I don't know. Maybe 16 or 17. Just before I turned 17 or just after I turned 17. I'm too lazy to calculate that. I just turned 17. Yeah, I just turned 17. So I had to travel alone. In that bus, there were many people on that bus. And there were strange things that happened, many supernatural things that happened until the driver had to stop the bus. And people were scared. And on that bus, it was even more scary to spend the night on a bus with strangers. And I was so young. And I didn't even have a blanket or anything. I was just praying. And I arrived the next morning around 10, 11. And my mother was relieved to see me because she knew if I had not gone back, there were plans, it was even possible to be even raped because I was alone and people knew. So, because my sisters and my brothers, they would go away, I was not close, they would go to me. I'm not a person who hangs around people, go to people's houses, but at the same time that place was difficult because of the things that were there. So the choice that Ruth made when she thought about Naomi, her actions are a testament of strength, the strength and beauty of her character. And her legacy continues to inspire and encourage people, women. Her story also highlights I'm reading something. Her story also highlights the importance of intergenerational relationships and the impact that older women can have on younger ones. Naomi's guidance and mentorship plays a significant role in Ruth's spiritual growth and development, demonstrating the value of wisdom, experience, and love in shaping our lives. This is actually a very deep insight. Because imagine Ruth, there are certain things that she benefited from Naomi. Her faith, because we have many cases. I had a disturbing experience where some lady that I know, she was getting married. I think it was like a second marriage. And then the mother-in-law was actually living with a boyfriend. And even having like breakups, and the son was there living with the mother. The mother was living with the man. I find it very disgusting, such relationships where women who are old are so loose to that extent that they remarry when you have grandchildren and they're remarrying. When you are supposed to be having stability, you're behaving like a teenager. For me, it's just odd. But anyway, that's just me. So, the other thing that is so interesting when you read the book, the first chapter of Ruth, the contrast, the author is trying to contrast, there's a contrast between Moab and Bethlehem. The fact that the land of God's people, Bethlehem, had a famine, where the land of idol worshippers was fertile, was very interesting to me. It has very interesting contrast, also mirrored by the unfruitfulness of the two women, Ruth and Orpah. And I think these implications of sin is highlighted in a way that it would cause God's favor, those who are favored, to appear to be worse than those who are lost in terms of material things. Also, the fact that the death and unfruitfulness of the womb happened in a place where it was fruitful revealed that you can run from certain tragedies to avoid death, but you can still die in the land of plenty. Life is not about is not about the provisions of material things, but the covering that one has. The fact that the land of God's own people is experiencing a famine and what the land of idol worshipper is famine is a stark reminder that spiritual blessings and provisions are not always tied to material abundance. You know, even if you are God's chosen people, you go through phases like this. And moreover, the unfruitfulness of Ruth and Orpah, despite being in the land of plenty, serves as a poignant reminder that true fruitfulness and blessing come from God's favor and covering, not just material prosperity. How many times have you heard testimonies of women who got married to men who are rich? You know, they call them what? Mbinga. You know, that's a slang. That slang that is used being, it's people who do rituals for money. Who use money, who get money from money rituals. You know, the insight also that is interesting is sin can cause those who are favored. Why are we seeing God's people in Bethlehem struggling with drought, whilst those that are worshipping idols are doing very well? You know, it can also, the insight that we can get from that could be that those who are favored, sin can cause those who are favored to be worse off than those who are lost. The deaths and unfruitfulness in Moab serve as a stark reminder that running from tragedy or seeking a refuge in material plenty is not guarantee of safety or blessing. Ultimately, it is the spiritual covering and favor of God that truly matter. So it's not about where you run to. You know, right now, people are running away from certain countries like Zimbabwe, seeking greener pastures. But right now, there are people who are in Zimbabwe who are doing so well materially, who are so blessed that their businesses are growing. So it's not about where you go. It's always about spiritual covering and favor of God. Because even those things that people are struggling with and running away, even when they leave and go to other countries, they still are not okay. And also, one of the powerful things that I really liked about the story of Ruth, Naomi was bitter and broken after the loss of his sons and husband. But Ruth gave her hope and stood in the gap for the family to restore her. Because Naomi, if you read there's and she said unto them, call me Naomi, don't call, and said unto them, call me not Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. This reminds me of Job's words, what she said here. But you know, Ruth's selflessness and devotion to Naomi helped to revitalize her spirit and give her a sense of purpose again. By standing in the gap for Naomi, Ruth creates a space for God to work in her life. And ultimately, Naomi's faith is renewed and she experiences God's restoration. Ruth's section demonstrates the power of human connections and community in facilitating healing and redemption. Her presence and support help Naomi confront her grief and find a way forward. And Naomi's story become one of hope and testimony to God's faithfulness. Through their relationship, we see the beautiful, dynamic intergenerational mentorship, like I talked about earlier, love, support, showcasing how people can come alongside each other in times of need and help facilitate God's restorative work in each other's lives. So the comparison with Job, the quote in Ruth 1 verse 20, when Naomi says, call me not Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me, bears the resemblance of Job's words in Job 27. Here are some parallels between the two passages. Both Naomi and Job express feelings of bitterness and hardship. Both attribute their suffering to God, with Naomi saying, the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me, and Job saying, and the Almighty who has made my soul bitter. Both passages convey a sense of resignation and acceptance, with Naomi asking to be called Mara, which means bitterness, and Job stating, all the while my spirit is in me and the breath of God is in my nostrils. There's something different. Though Naomi's statement is more about lamenting, while Job's words are part of a larger dialogue with his friends and God, where he grapples with the nature of justice and suffering. Okay, this was interesting. I think this is from Google, this one. So there's actually an interesting article that was recommended to me on this. Can I open it here? Where's my... Okay, let me open it on my phone because it's easier. But no, this is not... Okay. I hope it will open because I'm kind of far from the Wi-Fi. Okay, so let me read forward. Okay, the quote that was mentioned by Ruth. For me, I noticed also Job was blaming God, because if you read like his words, and the words especially of Elihu, words to Job in Job 33 verse 8 to the end, surely you have spoken you read that, you notice like Job was blaming God. So you notice like Elihu's words to Job are part of a crucial part of the dialogue that he was having, and they address Job's blaming of God. Elihu, who is young, a friend of Job, speaks up after Job's other friends have failed to provide satisfactory response to his suffering. Elihu's message can be summarized as follows. He acknowledged Job's claim of innocence. That's verse 9 in Job. He rebukes Job for implying that God is unfair and treats him like an enemy. Verse 10 and 11. He reminds Job that God is greater than men and doesn't owe anyone an explanation for his actions. Verse 12 and 13. He encourages Job to humbly accept God's sovereignty and recognize that God speaks in various ways, even if humans may not always understand. Elihu's words serve as a corrective to Job's perspectives, helping him and us to see that God's ways are higher than our own, and that we must approach him with humility, trust even in the face of adversity, suffering, and uncertainty. So, for me, let me digress a bit. In my life, there was a time I blamed someone for going to Makandiwa's church, PhD Ministries, UFIC, and another false prophet. So she was like moving from one false church to another. People, when they start this false prophet, they never get enough. They even visit all of them. They can even be jumping from one to the other whenever there is an activity. So I was blaming my relative for that, my sister, for attending the wrong churches, because I couldn't even understand how the way she was so brainwashed. I would always attack her for worsening her own situation, because I noticed it was after she started these churches that she started to struggle with sexual sin, sexual immorality. And also she started to struggle with relationships. She would break up with men who wanted to marry her. It was like she was possessed. So when she was doing these things and living in sin, but she was getting a lot of money, she was fruitful, she was even giving a lot of money to church, close to the pastors and their families and prophets. She was contributing a lot because she was also making money. Because I think, she was initiated in a way. So I remember I would always attack her for a situation and why she's going to these false churches. Then one day the Lord said to me, you can't tell her to stop and blame her without providing a solution. Unless and until you have a solution, don't say anything to her. Because your words, if they don't edify, keep quiet. Because she knows what she's fighting is spiritual and at least she's trying to do something. So unless you can speak life and you speak powered by me, led by me, then for now, keep quiet. So this revelation changed me and I realized. And as much as I talk about false churches, I don't attack people who go to these false churches. I don't even get angry when they contact me or when they tell me because I understand they are deceived. And for me, when I see a person going even to a white garment cult, I don't attack them for their faith. Because for me, at least they are doing something. They realize they have a spiritual problem. And I also understand that a person, for them to, it's so embarrassing to go to the white garment cults. So for them to even go there, it takes a person who is desperate. No one wants to be seen wearing that white garment or kneeling before those people doing their rituals. But for them to go is because they realize they need to do something. So for me, I don't attack them. I offer them a solution. I minister to them. That's why I do the videos that I do. And for me, I'm giving them a way out. I'm giving them a solution where they themselves can grow in their faith. So the revelation I had, I recognize that blaming and criticizing without offering support or solution only adds to the pain of the person. This is a very crucial insight because it takes a lot of humility and self-awareness to acknowledge that I was wrong. So I could also realize I could also see myself in Job's friends, his older friends. But I demonstrated a willingness to learn and grow. Because, for me, I was thinking I'm helping him, but I was not. Because just like Job's friends, they intended to comfort him, but ended up causing him more pain with their judgmental and accusatory words. So, my approach that I started, I admit I'm a human being, I make mistakes, but I understand that I'm always learning and I allow myself to be guided by God, the Lord's wisdom. And I wish people could do that. So that's how we should interact with others, by choosing to edify, support rather than criticize and blame. Because that's how you embody the love and compassion that Jesus Christ exemplified. Imagine if Jesus would start attacking a person for a denomination they go to, or attack a person blaming them for their situation. You were following this. Because these people are following these people because they just want a way out of the problems and they are looking for the truth. Remembering that everyone is doing the best they can with what they have is a vital perspective that we must have as Christians. It helps to approach others with empathy, understanding, and patience rather than judgment and criticism. So, for me, the last verse of Ruth chapter 1 is heavy for me. I can imagine how people spoke to Ruth and Naomi. So the last verse reads like, okay, you can read the whole thing. Okay, let me read the whole thing. So the two went until they came to Bethlehem, and it came up, but I read everything. I went out full, and the Lord has brought me home again empty. Why then call me Naomi, seeing the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me? So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law with her, which returned out of the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem in the beginning of the barley harvest. Imagine a person, she returned empty with just a daughter-in-law with no husband, no son. For me, this is really heavy when I think about this. I can imagine how people spoke to Ruth and Naomi about their situation. Already they were in a difficult situation, but it is very tough to deal with people more than it is to deal with such tragedy. So, I always see a lot of people when they are going through divorce, when they're going through grieving, when they're going through the times when they are exposed, maybe the husband is cheating, maybe the wife is cheating, and everyone is coming to them, judging them. Or when they lost their job, people are overwhelming them. So, the words of people when they are going through situations that are tough, they end up being much worse than the situation itself. Like, for example, when a bad thing happens, dealing with people for me is the worst. Because people come with their different perspectives, trying to give solutions. Some of them, they even try to, they act like you're not doing anything. They act like your situation, you are not seeing it. They act like you didn't make the right. Imagine how they were taking Ruth and Naomi. They'll be probably telling Ruth that, why are you even settling for such a life? Why are you wasting your time living with here when you can get married and move on? Time is flying, you're not getting any younger. Such observations. The last verse for me, it highlights the painful reality of facing criticism and judgment from others during difficult times. The verse says, and it shall be when the Lord thy God shall... The last verse is which one? What's going on with my Bible? Am I reading? No, this it's showing the different verse. Huh? No, it's showing me something else. Or the last verse of Ruth is actually, I was looking at the last verse of the whole chapter. For me, am I correct? But I seem to have mixed up something. Ruth 1. So I think something went, I need to check. Yeah, it's correct. I think there was a mix up here. Oh, Samuel. And so Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law with her, which returned out of the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem in the beginning of barley harvest. For me, that was really painful. You're going there empty-handed. You don't have your son. You just like living with you, and now you don't know where to start. Because Ruth and Naomi faced not only the loss of their loved ones, but also the harsh opinions and possibly even gossip from their community. People, imagine when she was seen begging, going to the field where poor people were harvesting, where these rich people were leaving things for the poor people to harvest. And she's going there like that. In times of hardship, it's so difficult to deal with people. It's like you can even meet, I remember some people, you'd meet a person, and then things were bad, and the person would be like, "Ah, you look so skinny. How you life? What's happening to you?" It never happened to me personally, but I saw it happening to people, where people are telling them, "Ah, you don't look like yourself. Hey, life has been, it's like already, you know." So for me, I find it difficult when I hear some remarks that people say to others when they meet them. "Ah, you lost your husband. Oh yeah, and now you're living where? Hey, life has been, and your life, you've been looking different. I almost didn't recognize you." People start to say things. So, for me, if you're going through these things, you have to be strong, you have to be forgiving, you have to have the love of God, and keep yourself focused on God's will. But it's not easy. And if you look at, it's not easy to remain focused on God's will, especially when faced with challenges and hardships. People's words can break you. But having strength, forgiving heart, and the love of God are essential qualities to navigate these difficult times. Because having the love of God in our hearts helps us to see things from God's perspective and trust in His sovereignty. It's not always easy, but it's worth it to keep our eyes fixed on Him and His eyes. Because the Bible says in Romans 8:28, and you know that all things work together for good to those who love God and to those who are called according to His purpose. So in life, we always need, and also I notice most people, when faced with difficult times, it's so easy to focus on immediate solutions instead of the will of God. Ruth was different. She focused on God and was willing to enjoy everything. She was focused on being there for Naomi, and her focus wasn't on getting a man. Her focus was not on a man. She actually even didn't think about it until Naomi proposed it. So Ruth's story teaches us the importance of focusing on God's will and being willing to endure difficulties with faith and trust. Unlike many of us who often prioritize immediate solutions and quick fixes, Ruth demonstrated a long-term perspective, surrendering her life to God's plan. Ruth's selflessness and dedication to Naomi are remarkable, and as I pointed out earlier, her focus wasn't on finding a husband or seeking personal gain. Instead, she focused on caring for Naomi and honoring God even in the midst of challenging circumstances. Ruth's examples encourages us to reevaluate our priorities and see God's will even when it's difficult or uncertain. By doing so, we can experience the blessings of His guidance and provisions, just as Ruth did. The Bible declares in Proverbs 3:5-6, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." So, because it is in God's will that we receive the promises of God. Read Hebrews 10:35-36 that says, "Don't throw away your confidence; it will be richly rewarded." You need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, you receive what He has promised. This passage encourages us to hold on to our faith and confidence in God, even when the journey gets tough. It reminds us that perseverance is key to receiving God's promises, and that our efforts to follow His will are not in vain. Ruth's story is a beautiful example of this passage in action. He persevered through difficult circumstances, remained faithful, and ultimately received God's blessings and promises. So may we be inspired by her example and hold on to our confidence in God, trusting in His promises and goodness. Because God's promises are yes and amen. But if a person is not willing to wait, as instructed in Isaiah, in brackets, Isaiah 40:31, and to stand in the gap, as given in Ezekiel, and put in brackets, Ezekiel 22:30, and endure all trials and testing to have virtues, James 1:2-4. that makes you do the will of God even in the most difficult circumstances. Hebrews 10:35-37. Then you may not get the promises of God. I'll put this on the description of the video, the last part. So, just to summarize, the condition for receiving God's promises: yes, God's promises are indeed yes and amen. 2 Corinthians 1:20. But we must also meet certain conditions to receive them. These conditions include willingness to wait, Isaiah 40:31, trusting in God's timing and sovereignty. That's number one. Number two, standing in the gap, Ezekiel 22:30, interceding and praying for others and ourselves. That's what standing in the gap is about. That's point number two. Then number three, enduring trials and testing, James 1:2-4, developing virtues like patience, perseverance, and faith. Number four, doing the will of God even in difficult circumstances, Hebrews 10:35-37, obedience and surrender to his plan. If we neglect these conditions, we may not even receive God's promises. But when we meet these conditions, we can confidently claim his promises and experience his blessings and faithfulness. So, what did I leave out? Okay, the other points to consider to complement what I've said. You also need faith. That's another thing you need. Hebrews 11:6, trusting God's promises and believing in his goodness. Number two, you also need obedience. Samuel 1 Samuel 15:22, follow God's commands and guidance. Number three, humility, James 4:6, recognizing your limitation and dependence on God. The next point, number four, repentance, Luke 13:3, turning away from sins and towards God, turning to God. Number five, gratitude and praise, Psalm 100:4 and 5, acknowledging and celebrating God's blessings and fruit and faithfulness. By incorporating these elements, we can deepen our relationship with God and position ourselves to receive his promises. But the original summary I gave already covered these 5 points implicitly, but I just wanted to add them explicitly to provide more comprehensive picture. So another point missing is dealing with the enemy. Because once you are doing the will of God to get the promises, you need to understand why you are out of God's promise and why you are in a situation that is not the perfect will of God. So most often it is through our own sin, our own will and sins that we hand over our bright destinies to the enemy. This is mostly done when we compromise and sell our inheritance for a bowl of soup like Esau. This is when we speak carelessly or agree to covenants or even visit shrines or even do things that give the enemy legal rights to oppress and divert our destinies. While it may be easy to give up one's inheritance, getting it back is not easy. Isaac told Esau that what was done, but when he gets restless, he will free himself. Genesis 27:40. So let me read Genesis 27:40. And by the sword you shall live, and you shall save your brother, and it shall come to pass when you become restless, then that you shall break his yoke from your neck. So when the enemy took something from you, you can take it back. But it's not going to be easy. You need to fight to get it. Because Satan does not give up anything that you gave him. So giving him something is easy. He will take, and you even take more than you gave him. But getting it back is more difficult. So the story of Esau and Jacob is a dealing with the enemy and recognizing our own choices and compromise can end off our destiny to him is a vital aspect of receiving God's promises. The story of Esau and Jacob is a powerful example of how easily we can trade our inheritance for temporary gain, and how difficult it can be to regain what was lost. Isaac's words to Esau indicate that breaking free from bondage requires effort and willingness to fight. This reminds me of Paul's exhortation in Ephesians 6:10-20 to put on the full armor of God and fight against the schemes of the enemy. It's a spiritual battle that requires vigilance, perseverance, and deep trust in God's power and promises. But it is easy to become comfortable in bondage and settle for less than God's best. But those willing to fight, pray, and trust in God's sovereignty can experience breakthrough and restoration. So I hope you're blessed by this. Sorry it's long. Sorry, when I'm doing Bible study, for me it's always long. I can even be lost for hours. I don't even do Bible study when other people are around, because I will ignore them. I will not have time for them. Because when I'm in the Word, for me, it is really, I get lost in the Word. For me, it's really alive. It changes my life. So I hope you're blessed, because I see a lot of people, they're talking about getting their own Boaz, but they don't understand the process to getting that Boaz. You even notice that Ruth was not focused on Boaz, and Boaz came, which is testament that when you delight in the Lord, He will give you your heart's desires. There is a better way of seeking something from God. You do like what Ruth did. It's an example. You do like what even Solomon did. He asked for something and God gave him everything. So there is a more perfect way of getting something. Like when you seek the kingdom of God and His word, and you seek His righteousness, God will give you everything else. So Ruth was not even targeting Boaz. He didn't even notice him. For her, she was focused on being there for Naomi. She was selfless. She was persevering, taking care of Naomi, working hard. She was not scared of anything that she was going through. But it was in that moment when she was doing those things, that's when Boaz noticed her. And then he decided to favor her. And then the other thing that happened, when there was a gathering, that's when her own mother-in-law is the one who put that idea in her mind. But for her, she was not focused. She was just focused on doing the will of God. So most of you are losing because you are focused on getting something. You are selfish. Your prayers are selfish. So when you become selfless, you get the promises of God in a faster way. So I hope you're blessed. Bye.